Yo, what's up? My name's Patrouski, and PokeMMO is not like your average Pokemon game. There's so many differences in terms of move pools, movesets, mechanics, and just generational ones that you wouldn't normally expect. So today, I want to talk about what is, in my opinion, the best starter Pokemon to use in each region in PokeMMO. Now, I usually just recommend running your favorite starter for each region, as that's usually the best way to maximize your enjoyment. However, if you want to be efficient, if this is your fourth or third or second playthrough or something of the sort, you want to get through as fast as possible, there are some optimal starters to pick, and I'll explain why here in a quick sec. So first things first, let's go ahead and of course start with KANTO. I'm going to brush on every Pokemon a little bit, each starter a little bit, but I'm going to actually focus on my favorite pick, or the best pick in my opinion, a lot more in depth. So first things first, let's go ahead and cover Bulbasaur. Bulbasaur slash the Venusaur line is probably the second best starter in my opinion out of these three. We have the options between Bulbasaur, Charmander, and Squirtle, of course. Bulbasaur is going to be the second pick because it does have access to Sleep Powder. It has access to Growth, which is pretty decent, but not the best move in any way. It does have access to Sweet Scent as well. However, you usually want to get that on a separate Pokemon, not, your main starter Pokemon, which is another issue it has. You can Leech Seed Stall, you can do a lot of stuff like that. It's a mixed attacker, it's decent speed, 80 speed. We'll talk about speed a lot and everything during it as well. The thing that Venusaur lacks is that you're able to pick up actually a much better grass type during KANTO in Oddish. Getting Oddish into Gloom very quickly and getting that into Blossom and getting a Quiver Dance Blossom is so much infinitely more powerful than a Venusaur. Now, one of the quickest and most common arguments you see for Bulbasaur is that people will always say, oh, but Bulbasaur's super good against the first two gyms, and then, oh, by the third gym, you should pick up like a different Pokemon to be able to take care of it. However, I don't like that argument, because if you have to spend time picking up another Pokemon to make up for the lack of your starter Pokemon, that's a huge issue, right? That is a weakness in itself if you have to spend time doing something else or acquiring a different Pokemon to cover its weaknesses. Now, you're always going to have to do that to some extent, but I think Bulbasaur has some really clear ones. Another huge issue with Venusaur slash Bulbasaur is that Koga and Erica both have a lot of 4 times resistances to grass-type Pokemon that they wouldn't normally have in the traditional storylines. Koga has Crobat, Erica has a lot of 4 times resist type, a lot of poison grass Pokemon, which they wouldn't normally have in the traditional games. That's why Venusaur is my number 2 pick. Now, Charizard is my 3rd most powerful pick, unfortunately. I know that may hurt a lot of you guys to hear. Charizard is a really cool Pokemon, but he's really fine in the storylines. He's just really fragile. Him being the only KANTO starter with a 4 times weakness to rock really just hurts him, especially when there's so many rock type Pokemon in the Elite Four, or so many Stone Edges being thrown out in the Elite Four. Stone Edges, rock slides, which once again you wouldn't normally see in the traditional cartridge games. However, we do see a lot of Stone Edges, we do see a lot of rock slides here, so that's why Charizard is honestly immediately knocked off the billboard just because of that. We then move on to my number 1 pick for KANTO, which ends up being Blastoise. Blastoise is the best pick by far for KANTO, in my opinion, mostly because of one move, that move being Shell Smash. Shell Smash is unbelievably, incredibly powerful in a storyline run, being able to lower your defense stats each by 1, but sharply raising your attack, special attack, and speed stats by 2 each. That is going to allow you to pull off a mixed sweep. It's going to allow you to one-shot everything. As long as you survive that first attack, you're usually able to one-shot everything and sweep from that point forward. So that's always what you're aiming for in PokeMMO. Generally, the best way to handle the storylines in PokeMMO is to spend the first turn or 2 setting up and then sweeping through an entire tough gym leader or Elite Four member or whatever it may be for the rest of that fight. Also, being able to set up Rain Dance, having decent coverage in Bite pretty early on, the Stab, Water move, being able to use Surf is super important. Surf's just a really powerful move that you get as an HM, which is super nice. It still has decent enough speed at 78, being the slowest starter, decent bulk, decent enough attacks to make it work, and just water types tend to be pretty good in Pokemon, especially bulky water types, as many people do know. But it truly is just hard to beat that Shell Smash attack. This is something you would not have access to in traditional Fire Red or any sort of Gen 1 game, so this really throws them over the top. Now, moving on to JOHTO, I'm going to try to cover this one pretty quickly because at the time of recording, JOHTO isn't actually even in the game. The starters are, however, the storyline is not. So I'm going to cover what, in my opinion, I'm going to guesstimate what it'll end up being like once JOHTO is in the game, but since we just don't know yet, this is all just hearsay and guesstimate, so take it with a huge grain of salt. But I'm going to run through it kind of quickly. I think Typhlosion is going to end up being the worst starter for JOHTO, which is actually probably going to be the one I end up picking because I just enjoy it so much. But in terms of actual effectiveness, I think Typhlosion is the worst. Mono Fire type is pretty bad defensively. It can be decent offensively. The issue is it doesn't really learn any decent Fire type attacks until you get up to like Lava Plume, and then you don't get Flamethrower until 48. So really long time on that. You're stuck with physical attacks on him for quite a while, like Quick Attack and such, which is really not great, or Flame Charge, which is once again really not great. You want to get those special attacking moves. Typhlosion also needs a lot of support in TMs to actually have any sort of coverage. If you want to have stuff like Focus Blast, if you want to have stuff like, I believe, Earth Power, I believe you can learn that. You really need to teach him all sorts of TMs, Solar Beam. Like, he really needs support through TMs to actually be decent enough in the storylines. Extra Sensory is an egg move, which you won't be able to get on your starter, so he really does struggle. He obviously has really nice stats in terms of offensive and speed, but he doesn't have the coverage to actually back it up and take care of everything in the storyline. Meganium, funnily enough, is probably going to be the second best in my opinion. It's very slow, but it's a grass type Pokemon, so that means that it immediately has access to Sleep Powder, has access to Leech Seed. You're probably going to be able to put Protect on it, do some stall-y sort of tactics. Meganium is surprisingly bulky and can actually be really, really annoying to deal with and get rid of. In a storyline run, there's a really good chance you're able to just Leech Seed, Toxic, and like protect leftovers, like stall everything to death with Meganium, and it'd be really consistent. Now, that is extremely slow, and you don't want to have to do that in a storyline. However, even not considering that, Meganium actually has pretty decent coverage, non-stab coverage, being a grass type only, but it can get things like Giga Drain, it can get things like Earthquake, which you'd be really surprised by, and Meganium's base stats in terms of its physical attack and special attack are actually quite even, if I remember correctly. So it's pretty decent. I think Meganium will be pretty decent. I think it'll be the second best pick for JOHTO. And moving on to what is my opinion, probably the best starter pick for JOHTO, or what it will be, it's probably going to be Feraligatr. Feraligatr is fantastic because it's able to learn Dragon Dance and Sword Dance. That's really all you need for a storyline run. A bulky water type or a decent water type Pokemon that can learn Dragon Dance or Sword Dance, and you can either use Aqua Jet or just Waterfall Spam, which is an HM, of course. Like, being able to spam those powerful physical water type moves is just fantastic. You could probably get some coverage on him as well with the elemental punches, like Thunder Punch, Fire Punch, Ice Punch, if you wanted to tutor him up, but he's probably going to be fantastic no matter what. Get any Pokemon with a decent base stat speed. I believe he's 70 or 80 base stats, which is enough for the storyline. Once you start reaching under 70 base stats speed for a storyline Pokemon, that's when things get a little sketchy. That's when he's a little too slow, and you really want to stick above to like 70 to 80 plus for storyline Pokemon. But he's going to be fantastic. Spend a turn or two setting him up with either Dragon Dance or a Swords Dance, and he's just going to plow through everything and be super tough to deal with. It's always powerful in the storyline runs in PokeMMO. Alright, now moving on to HOENN, let's go ahead and check out our options. We have Treecko, Torchic, and Mudkip. Now, this is an interesting one. In my opinion, I think Treecko is probably the worst starter in HOENN. Once again, my favorite starter of the three, but it's probably effectively the worst. And I've used this one a lot to understand this. Sceptile has a really tough time doing enough damage since his attack is 85. His 105 special attack is nice, but he has issue having coverage for that special attack. You can run things like Giga Drain, but that really is where it stops. He really has more of a physically offensive moveset. Another huge issue with Sceptile is his weak defenses, and he's really frail. He does get, I believe, dark type moves pretty early on, like Assurance and stuff, which actually can be super nice. He does get some really nice level up moves in Leaf Blade, Excisor, etc. But he has huge issues with, he doesn't really do quite enough damage. He doesn't really have any setup moves to speak of, aside from he might have access to Swords Dance, I believe, but you'd have to TM that, yeah, which you don't want to waste TMs if possible on a storyline Pokemon unless it's really good for it. Swords Dance isn't even fantastic for him since he has that 85 attack and not the, the special attacks that are kind of mixed. A huge issue here is that he actually has, funnily enough, too high of a speed for the storyline. Once you reach this level of speed, it just kind of becomes useless. If you have any sort of speed EVs or anything like that, you're usually outspeeding anything anyways. 120 just kind of gets ridiculous. You don't really need this much speed in a storyline run. If you have like an 80 or 90 or 100 base stat speed Pokemon, you're outspeeding 90% of things, maybe even 95. Once you're giving up other resources like your defenses and your attacks for this much speed, you're losing out on other stats. So that's why I go ahead and give Sceptile the worst pick, unfortunately. Now, Blaziken is probably the best pick, so let's go ahead and get back to that. Number 2 is going to be Swampert. Swampert's the second pick. Really nice Typing. Water Ground's a fantastic typing. Having access to Stab, Earthquake so early on is fantastic. You can even make arguments for Swampert being the best, but it's a really good Pokemon. Having access to Stab, Waterfall, and Stab EQ combo is so incredibly good. Now, obviously, having a 4x weakness to Grass, or having a 4x weakness at all as a starter Pokemon is a really big deal. I crunch huge numbers down on that because it's a really big deal. However, the typing is so good that you really only have that Grass weakness, so it kind of makes up for it, right? But having access to Rock Slide so early on, you learn Earthquake, even gets Hammer Arm later on, like, its learned move pool is really good, and being able to throw out either Surf or Waterfall and stuff like that is really fantastic. Now, Swampert can't really set up, which is a big deal in PokeMMO, but having great immediate damage is not at all a bad thing. Setup is probably the best way to sweep the storylines, but immediate damage is needed on every storyline team for sure. You can set up with Curse, but that's going to hurt his already bad speed, and that's why I put Swampert down on this list at number 2. Having that 60 base stat speed is not only going to allow so many Pokemon to move before you, but it's just going to slow down your general storyline progress. Even if you have an extremely bulky and hard-hitting Pokemon, if they have to move second in every single fight, you're just wasting time in a storyline run. Whereas, if you kill the Pokemon, you don't have to waste time on their animation to see their attack. That's actually a really big deal in a storyline run. But back over to Blaziken. Blaziken's probably the best starter here in my opinion by far. Having that 120 base attack, 110 base special attack, 80 speed, it's perfect. It's chef's kiss. It's beautiful. It's perfect. Having the double massive attacks and then having enough speed to outspeed everything in the storyline is just fantastic. Also, the coverage typing. I mean, firefighting, we've seen it over and over again, starting from Blaziken because it's so good. And it's so good in the storylines and it's so fun. And it has a great move pool. Look at all these look at all these moves. We get Blaze Kick, we get Brave Bird, Close Combat, Fire Punch is even like decent-ish, not kind of, you really want Blaze Kick, I guess, over it. Flamethrower is a decent if you want to go mixed. Flare Blitz and Brave Bird are both fantastic. However, I would say you probably want to avoid these in the storylines if possible, maybe as an extra move, but you want to avoid these because that 33% recoil is just too much in a storyline run. It's too much damage against yourself. In PvP, it's fantastic. You'll take that every time. But in a storyline run, you don't want to be taking that much damage. It's more about consistency. Now, High Jump Kick, I will run into storyline run because 130 base power stab is just too insane to worry about that 10% accuracy miss. It's just too much damage. If you just have like Blaze Kick, Flamethrower, and High Jump Kick on a Blaziken, you're probably just one-shotting everything in the entire storyline for the entire game. It's just so good. It's just so good. Aerial Ace is also really nice coverage if you want to go that over Brave Bird to avoid that. You can also go Bulk Up and Swords Dance on this thing. Yeah, I don't know how you beat Blaziken. It's probably one of the best Pokemon for a starter. It's just fantastic for a storyline run. It just makes things so efficient. It's so powerful. It's all the damage you need, all the speed you need perfectly enough. Obviously, it's not the bulkiest thing in the world, but it's not the frailest thing in the world either. It's just fantastic. It's Blaziken. Alright, now we move on over to SINNOH's starters, and these are probably the starters that I have the least experience with, aside from the JOHTO ones, of course. And if you have any disagreements with anything I've said so far today, go ahead and leave disagreements, comments, feedback down in the comments down below. It's a perfect time to do so. Obviously, do it politely and do it kindly, but present your points. You can argue why you think Swampert's the best of the HOENN starters for whatever reasons, and, you know, cite, like, oh, it's because of, like, this stat, because of this move, like, you know, etc., etc. Like, oh, you missed, like, this coverage. Like, go for it. It's totally fine. Let your opinion be heard. Alright, but on to these SINNOH starters. I'm honestly not going to waste too much time with Torterra because, once again, it's probably my favorite, well, it's definitely my favorite starter of this region, and it's probably the worst, by far. Grass Ground is just not a very good typing. You still end up being weak to a lot of stuff that you wouldn't expect, and you just end up taking too much damage. Even though he has some really decent bulk, it's not good enough. If his special defense was like 100 plus, like maybe, and if his HP was like 120, then maybe he'd be decent, bulky enough, but that 56 speed stat is just brutal. The 109 attack is just still not enough damage, even having access to Stab, Earthquake, the Wood Hammer. Wood Hammer is great, but you take the recoil, which you really don't want in a storyline run. It's just, yeah, Torterra just can't get it done, even though he's my favorite starter, and I'll always pick him. He's the worst by far in Sinnoh. It's not even close. Might be one of the worst starters in any region in terms of efficiency and getting through a storyline. Next, let's talk about Empoleon, or the Piplup line. Empoleon is definitely a Pokemon that I've learned to gain more and more appreciation for over the years. Its typing is very unique, which is something you always hear about, and it really does add a lot of defensive utility, and Steel is a very good defensive typing. And when you add a very good defensive typing to an already infamously good Balti Water Pokemon, or an infamously good, I guess, archetype in Balti Water, you end up with a pretty defensive, but pretty hard hitting with 111 special attack and 8. Look, higher. It has higher attack than Torterra. Are you kidding me? In terms of special attack versus physical attack, of course, but 86 physical attack, 111 special attack, and then it's pretty freaking bulky. Now, the 60 base stat speed, it's even faster than Torterra. Why is it better than Torterra in every way? I don't know. 60 base stat speed is pretty interesting. It's a little too slow, I'd say, for sure. Well, you can make it work, but it's definitely too slow. That's why it's the second best. It's funny how slow all the SINNOH starters are. I'm kind of just realizing all of them are so slow, except for, I mean, the best one. We'll talk about that in a quick sec. But you do get access to Aqua Jet on evolution, which is a really big deal. Having Stab Aqua Jet on a starter-type Pokemon just by evolving it, you don't see that very often. That's a very, very powerful tool. So you get Aqua Jet, you get access to Swords Dance upon level up, which is insane. You now get access to Roost. That's a big deal. That's a huge, huge, huge deal. So obviously also get access to Hydro Pump and Waterfall if you want that, any sort of HMs and such. It does also get things like Drill Peck upon level up, Double Edge is like whatever. There's a lot of great things. Roost, the main powerful moves for it are probably Swords Dance, Roost. You probably go Aqua Jet, or I guess maybe just more of a stab thing, and then Flash Cannon. That's probably what I would go for it. I'd probably end up going some combination of that. Swords Dance, Roost, Aqua Jet, Flash Cannon. Maybe that's just your move pool. The issue is Swords Dance doesn't boost your Flash Cannon, so maybe there's some sort of other physical stab type move you could throw in, but I'm not sure. Maybe you don't go Swords Dance on this thing. Maybe you actually just go some sort of physical. Yeah, no, you can go some mixed build. You do a lot of things. It has Rock Slide as well. Scald, it can spam Scalds. Yeah, it's just so good. Spamming Scalds in storyline with 111 base special attack on a super, super bulky water. I mean, what else could you want? Empoleon's just pretty great. It's a really cool Pokemon, really good Pokemon. The main thing it's lacking is its speed stat. That 60 speed really hurts it. Now moving on to the best SINNOH starter by far in terms of efficiency for completing a storyline, Infernape. Pretty much the same story as Blaziken, but honestly slightly worse than Blaziken in my opinion. It's better than Blaziken in PvP because you actually really want that higher speed stat, but in the storyline, that higher speed stat doesn't actually really mean too much for it. A little bit, but you actually lose a little bit of damage across the board, but the fact that it has enough. It has enough damage, it has enough speed. The bulk is not really there, of course, but man, close combat, you get Mach Punch, which is fantastic. Stab, Mach Punch, another firefighting type. It's just so good. It's another fantastic firefighting type Pokemon that can really just punch massive holes in the enemy team. There's not really any sort of, you could go Nasty Plot, I guess, on it. It can also get U-Turn, which U-Turn is often super underlooked in a storyline run. U-Turn can be super, super important for maintaining momentum, even in a storyline run, which is pretty good. But you probably go some sort of combination of close combat, Fire Blitz, or Flare Blitz, excuse me, Mach Punch, and then maybe like Flamethrower. You probably just go straight coverage moves, or just stab moves, and then go different ones for different reasons and different utility in different fights. There's tons of different great things you can do. Acrobatics and Aerial Ace are also fantastic, always on this kind of Pokemon. You can go Drain Punch and stuff if you want to run TMs and stuff, but just the move pool alone that it just learns via level up. Infernape's just so good, just off the stats. If this thing had the shittiest move pool in the world, but it learned like Flamethrower and Close Combat, and that's it with these stats, it would probably still be the best in this region especially. I think this region has some of the weaker starters for efficiently beating the storyline, but Infernape is just incredible. It takes the cake by far. Alright, now the last storyline to cover of the PokeMMO regions, we have UNOVA. Now, I do have quite a bit of experience with UNOVA. Let's go ahead and break it down. Let's go over to the UNOVA Pokedex. We have Snivy, Tepid, and Oshawott to cover. Snivy is my personal favorite of the three, and it's probably the second best starter for the region. Serperior just has really like decent stats overall. It has surprisingly decent bulk. Its grass typing is decent enough. Combining this bulk with a really strong stab Giga Drain is pretty nice. It has 113 speed, which is once again kind of a little too much for a storyline, but still good, obviously, right? We have access to things like Leech Seed. We have Leaf Blade, so we can go mixed with Leaf Blade and Giga Drain. We do get access to Coil, which is a decent setup move. It's not the best by any means, but on a Pokemon that already has that really high speed, you don't really need to be raising your speed with any sort of setup move, right? So raising your attack and defense, raising your bulk can actually be super relevant. So just a Giga Drain Serperior with Coil, and then like Leaf Blade as obviously your physical move to get boosted by the Coil is all super important. Doesn't have the craziest moveset of all time is kind of the biggest issue. Its coverage is really lacking, but it's just decent stats all around, and plus how terrible the third best Pokemon, the third best starter is, it's kind of why it ends up being number 2. Now on to Tepid/Emboar, which is, in my opinion, probably the third worst starter, the worst starter in UNOVA, even though I love it so much. People will often give the argument that Emboar is fantastic because you can use Flame Charge to go ahead and make up for its speed, but in my opinion, I think that's a cope. Having to make up for your speed like that is just pretty pathetic, and not being able to actually use a setup move like Dragon Dance or fix any of your other stats like your attack, it's not really good. So Emboar's biggest thing that holds him back is just his speed and his bulk even. His defense, special defense being so low is brutal. Even though his HP is high, his defense is being too low. It really does hurt him. But 65 speed is just brutal. He has the blistering, beautiful 123 attack, and then the super solid 100 special attack to follow it up to be an incredible mixed threat, and then he just falls flat by 65 speed and just gets outsped by everything. People will always make the argument that you want to keep Flame Charge on him to do a little bit of damage and then also increase his speed stat for the future of the battle, but there's a lot of times where that increase of the speed stat still allows him to get outsped by other Pokemon, which is really sad. And then you have to Flame Charge twice for a battle. It's terrible, and you don't want to be spending that first turn making up for a super shitty stat. You want to be spending that first turn essentially exacerbating already powerful stats. Even though Emboar has a really nice fighting cover typing, of course, and has pretty decent moves, doesn't really get close combat easily though. It gets Hammer Arm and stuff, which once again hurts his best fighting type was Hammer Arm, which hurts his already shitty speed. So you end up with a lot of issues with Emboar. Much less powerful than Blaziken or Infernape, unfortunately. I love the design, I love the Pokemon, even the underrated Pignite, but definitely the worst starter in UNOVA. Onto the third starter in UNOVA, which is also the best in my personal opinion, but I could see some arguments back and forth for this. I'm going to go with Samurott. Samurott is also, I don't like its design, it's a very clunky looking Pokemon. However, Samurott is a perfect Balti Water with mixed attacks, and it has that 70 base stat speed, which is, even though it's only a 5 difference between it and Emboar, it's crazy how much that matters. You'd be really surprised how many Pokemon end up between that 60 to 80 base stat speed average. Like, most Pokemon are around that stat, and when you have Samurott, if you put a couple speed EVs into it, you're able to outspeed much more Pokemon than Emboar, that 65 base stat speed. So the Balti Water, alongside the coverage, alongside the just those 5 speed stats, really mattering to that extent is pretty crazy. You get things like Mega Horn, which is a really nice coverage move. Obviously 85% accuracy isn't perfect, but it's definitely worth it for the trade-off. You get things like Slash, which is also just super decent. You get tons of other things like Aqua Jet on this thing via level up. You get Aqua Tail, or you can just run Waterfall, of course. Swords Dance, you get level 58. Now, I will say, I believe Unova's level cap for the Elite Four is pretty low. I think it's level 56, so you would have to use Mushrooms or Heart Scales to relearn Swords Dance onto this thing to be able to actually have it for the Elite Four, but you can still do that, which is super nice. Just a really solid Pokemon all around. I think Unova, once again, has some of the worst Pokemon for the storylines in terms of the starters. I wonder if they did that intentionally, since Gen 5 was meant to be such a reboot for the series. I wonder if they really wanted you to seek out other Pokemon in the wild and have to use those to complete your storyline more effectively. I've never thought about that before, but it's very possible. But yeah, what else can you say about Samurott? Just a really decent Balti Water type, has enough bulk, has the 100 plus attacks, and then the 70 plus speed really does matter. Once again, that 70 to 65, it's crazy how much that matters. You can also get some fighting type coverage on him, which is fantastic if you can get it. Now, of course, tutoring with superpower, getting some sort of tutor moves, a little complicated. You can also get Swords Dance, like I mentioned. Razor Shell is also somewhat of a decent physical water move that goes underrated in the storyline runs, being able to lower your target's defense at a 75 power, 95% accuracy. It's an early kind of move. Can also go mixed, of course, having Grass Knot, Hydro Pump. I believe it's Ice Beam we saw. Yeah, Ice Beam is really good, obviously. One of the best moves probably in the storyline. Can go Dragon Tail. Can do a lot of fun stuff. Aerial Ace, of course, is always decent enough coverage, honestly, in a storyline run. Just a really solid Balti Water. It just ends up being the better out of the 3 options, in my opinion. But that's it. Hopefully that covers everything. If you disagree with anything I said today, once again, leave polite comments down in the comment section down below. Make sure to leave a like on this video if it was helpful or maybe even mildly entertaining. Dislike if you didn't enjoy it. That's totally okay as well. Subscribe to the channel for daily PokeMMO uploads. I do upload at least one PokeMMO video every single day, as well as streaming Monday through Thursday at 12 p.m. EST here on YouTube and on Twitch. Definitely check those out. It's a lot of fun. My Discord is linked down below if you want to get more involved with the community or maybe meet more people who love this game just as much as you do. And if you want to go above and beyond and support the channel and allow me to stay full-time, YouTube memberships, Twitch Primes, Twitch subs, PayPal/Venmo, all that stuff's linked down below. It's never needed, but it does help out a ton. I appreciate you guys. Have a great day. What's up, Sky Zero? I see you with your tepid. Have a good one, guys. I'll see you later. Peace. Yo, if you're watching this, that means you watched the entire video. So first things first, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. And if your name is on this list, that means you go above and beyond and support the channel and allow me to do what I do every single day. Thank you so much and have a great day.